Hello and welcome to this webinar today hosted by Julie's Bicycle and in partnership with Eurocities as part of the EU-funded ROC project. So firstly, before we get started with today's content, I would like to introduce ROC to you and Julie's Bicycle and Eurocities. So Julie's Bicycle is a charity based in London, working on the integration of arts and culture and environmental sustainability. And Eurocities is a network of major European cities founded in 1986 and based in Brussels. And they represent more than 140 cities all over Europe. And these two organisations, alongside the 30 other organisations, make up the ROC Partnership, an EU Horizon 2020 funded programme. And ROC stands for Regeneration and Optimisation of Cultural Heritage in Creative and Knowledge Cities. And this project is really considering cultural heritage, aiming to demonstrate how cultural historical city centres can become laboratories for testing new models of urban regeneration. And circularity and adaptive reuse are of course, strong thematic components of the programme. And I've just included a definition from Julie's Bicycle there. And you can find out more about ROC following the hyperlink on the slide. Sorry, I was just informed a slight technical issue there of my slide, in fact, not being shared. So hopefully you can all see it now. So before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping prompts. First of all, I would just like to check that you can hear me okay. So you will see on the taskbar on your screen, there is a little hand sign. So if you don't mind just clicking on your hand, which will indicate that you can hear me okay. Lovely, I can see people starting to use that. Super, okay, that's great. Thank you very much. You will also see that there is the questions task bar as well, so you can use that in order to submit questions. We will have a designated Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so you can either pop them in as we go through the slides or wait until the end. We will be recording today's webinar and making that recording available to you afterwards, so you can share it with your friends and colleagues who are unable to join us today. And if you want to share any thoughts, we've got some social media tags as well. And I'm joined by my colleague at Eurocities, Cecile Hooper, who is on the who is supporting today's webinar, looking at the questions, so she will be able to respond to you as well. And I'm really delighted to announce that we have two fantastic speakers with us today. We're really lucky to have Tamara Strijp-S from Metabolic in the first part of the webinar, and Tamara leads the Circular Cities programme at Metabolic and has worked on a wide range of urban resilience projects focused on water, ecology, freight, waste management and renewable energy. And Tamara is going to open in conversation with myself regarding some introductory concepts and rationale for investing in the circular economy and some key insights from her work at Metabolic. We are also joined by Philip Guthrie, who is our second speaker today, and Phil will be delivering a presentation later on in the second part of the webinar, sharing some key projects, ideas and learnings from Circular London. Phil is Circular London's Collaboration Hub Project Officer, and the Circular London programme, which is part of London Waste and Recycling Board, is designed to create the conditions for London to thrive through enabling and promoting circular economy across a wide range of stakeholders within the city. And Phil will be our on-hand expert for the Q&A later on. So I would like now to welcome Tamara Striefland. And Tamara, I've just unmuted your microphone, so you are now officially joined the webinar today.
That's great, thank you.
So thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I have a few questions that I'd like us to run through so we can give our attendees some clearer insights into what Metabolic has been doing and what kind of opportunities and recommendations we can therefore give to the cities on today's call.
Sounds good.
Metabolic has worked with organisations, buildings and festivals on circular economy approaches to energy, waste, food and water. And now cities such as Amsterdam in the Netherlands and Charlotte in the US. And from reading all the brilliant reports on your website, which I highly encourage people to read, Charlotte is the first city in the United States to make a commitment to adopting the circular economy. So why do you think cities are starting to engage with the circular economy agenda? And what do you think their understanding is the benefits or drivers?
Yeah, great question. So to start, I think it's important to realize that city governments are dealing with many large challenges, such as how they can provide resources for their population in an equitable and also just way. But also, how can they maintain a healthy urban environment, and how can you plan for the future city and account for the projected urban growth without making a negative impact somewhere else, right? So there's a lot of these challenges at stake. But then we get to the point that there's the vision for the city of the future is not always clear, it's quite intangible. And there, however, are all these terms, such as the resilient city, the sustainable city or healthy city, and a smart city. You might have heard of all of these. There's many more out there. But as a city government, it's quite challenging on how to address these in a practical manner. So how do you get to a vision like that? Where do you start by getting towards a city of the future? So I think to city governments, the circular economy is quite appealing because it can provide a more tangible strategy towards a future city. It's also good in mind that many cities and their municipal governments have already made many goals and have many ambitions. So not only on their municipal level, but also there's these regional goals and then there's national goals. And we also see more and more cities engaging with the sustainable development goals. So when you think about that, like think about climate adaptation or emission goals, like limiting carbon dioxide emissions, or energy goals or zero waste. And in projects we've worked with, we see in many cases that cities often take one of these goals as a starting point. So for example, Singapore is really focusing on resiliency and water, and Charlotte in the US is really focusing on zero waste. So the circular economy as a strategy is also appealing because it links these existing goals to new economic models and shows how by creating a more livable city or a waste-free city or even an energy-producing city, you can unlock value. So in short, like a circular strategy frames these goals that can be seen as a challenge for governments, or like something that we have to work for, as something positive and really tie it to benefits for the urban populations. And then finally, I think one of the unique characteristics of the circular economy is that it really provides a vehicle for connecting the different departments within local governments, because there's water departments, energy departments, and this is really a means to bring all these different municipal departments together and have them work integrally. So I think those are like great benefits for cities in this circular economy.
Great. And from my very anecdotal experience, it can be sometimes quite challenging to communicate the circular economy without the conversation either defaulting to simply talking about recycling or being focused on more industrial scale processes, which perhaps city government has less influence over. So can you help us understand the roles or dynamic between business, government and civil society in regards to circular economy adoption?
Yeah, I think really that dynamic and collaboration between the different stakeholders is crucial in this transition to a circular economy. To get everybody on board, it's really important to show what value could be created by achieving ambitions, right? Like really making, really showing the value that can be produced, but also monitoring the impact that can be achieved. So in our projects and strategies, we often do this by adding in a co-creation component. So this also helps understanding where the kind of momentum is, right? So what is the best business case to pursue in, for example, achieving better recycling rates? And also how local governments can help facilitate this. So besides government, civil society, as you mentioned, and entrepreneurs, like I think knowledge institutes can also play a very interesting role in this. A nice example of a collaborative effort that we've been a part of is the repair project we are part of with the AMS Institute, which is a technical knowledge institute in Amsterdam, as part of the Horizon 2020 project. And the purpose of this project is really to provide a tool for local government to integrate their integrate resource management in their design and planning processes. So in this project, we map in a very detailed way the amount of food waste that is produced in the metropolitan area of Amsterdam. And the tool doesn't only show where the food waste is produced and who produces the food waste, but it also shows how much of it there is out there and how it's being processed right now. So knowing where these flows are produced allows us to link them to new solutions. And the way that we are working with that is by organizing these workshops in which we invite not only entrepreneurs, but also government officials and also just people that are interested in these kind of solutions. And then we start mapping out what are the best ways to kind of implement these solutions that can use these food streams or food waste streams. And I think that's a really good way of bringing these stakeholder groups together and creating some sort of buy-in from everyone from the beginning of a process.
So this sounds like it's going to lead on quite well to the next question,
Okay.
which is you start your process by understanding the baseline, how circular a city is currently, before developing those improvement strategies. So what kind of information are you collecting, and how do you use this to inform your approach or strategy for the city?
Yeah, so indeed, like that follows on quite well. Like I think an important part of our way of working is this kind of like current state analysis or baseline assessment. Because if you want to know how to get where you want to go, you also have to kind of understand where you're coming from, right? So to kind of see what is possible and what you're working with. So in the previous, like in the repair project, I already talked a little bit about these waste flows. But one way we look at the baseline is through looking at the urban metabolism, a material flow analysis. And in this material flow, we look at what comes into a city, its incoming flow. So think about the water and the energy and the food and resources we use. We also look at what is stored in the city, the stock. So think about the building materials that are existing in buildings right now or stored in buildings. And then also we look at the outcoming flows, for example, food waste or emissions or wastewater. A good example is we did this for the city of Rotterdam in Holland for 4 key sectors. So consumer goods or hospitals, agri-food, so like agriculture and food, and also the building and construction sector. And in this project, we use this analysis to identify the largest leverage points, or points where you can make a large positive impact by choosing a more circular strategy. So in Rotterdam, for example, we saw a lot of concrete was used in the construction sector, and concrete has a very big embedded impact, such as the water being used and the energy it costs in its production. So an opportunity here is to make use of another resource in the construction phase or make use of recycled concrete instead. So when you have identified these leverage points, we can then link them to interventions. So this is a really great way of getting insights of what are the priorities in your city. So how you can start making impact by kind of using these leverage points.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and I think one other important point to make is that monitoring is also very important. So once you know your baseline, you could also kind of have these key performance indicators and link them to your ambitions. So for example, if your ambition is zero waste going to a landfill, a key performance indicator could be the amount of waste going to landfill. Then if you calculate your baseline, you can also see if the interventions you're choosing are having the wanted effect. So if you can see if they're as effective if you thought they would be, or if, you know, or if something else would be a better incentive.
Yes, absolutely. That is something certainly at Julie's Bicycle we also advocate for. You have to understand your impacts before you can make steps to reduce them. So if to bring in the rock project more concretely, something you reference in your business case for circularity is the setting up of these material innovation labs. And in the rock project, there is a strong focus on encouraging and incubating local entrepreneurship and innovation. We refer to them as urban living labs. And I wondered if you could share a little experience from Amsterdam's circular living lab, perhaps looking at the technological innovation. It was conceptualized as a clean tech playground, and perhaps the role it's played in public engagement.
Yeah, sure. So our circular work location, or clean tech playground, or however you want to call it, in Amsterdam is called the Keuvel. And it started out 6 years ago when the city of Amsterdam gave out a tender for this polluted old shipyard in the north of Amsterdam. And together with a consortium of other companies, including some architects, this idea of a series of old recycled houseboats on land connected by a boardwalk with a remediating park in the middle was developed. So the park in the middle really aims to clean the pollution that is in the soil. And these houseboats are used by social enterprises, and many sustainable technologies are tested on this ground. And there's also a restaurant on site, just to kind of sketch the place. So the local government really sees this place as an experimental zone, which allows us to test these new circular strategies and systems, such as exchanging energy over a smart grid, or retrieving struvite out of urine, or that all the boats are off the wastewater system. So there's a lot of composting toilets. And then we also have an aquaponics system that produces some crops for the restaurant. And so we're really trying to kind of showcase these circular loops and really showcase these technologies. And there are many benefits to this place. So first, it functions as a lighthouse. So it's a place where you can really show what it looks like, right? What circularity looks like by giving people tours, for example, or giving talks. There's there's thousands of people coming to this terrain every year, and it's really nice, especially in summer. And it's really great for swimming around there, for example. So we really try to showcase what is possible in terms of the circular economy. Another really important part is how much you can learn in terms of the process of innovation, right? So the people that worked on the Keuvel have really learned a lot about permits or governmental processes, or how you can work together with local governments, but also what technologies work and what technologies don't work. And then finally, it's also like social inclusivity is also key. Like this was a shipyard before, so it's also important to kind of interact with the people, like with the community around as well. So there's a lot of festivals that are being organized, and there's a lot of attention for example, materials and zero waste, and what you could create and what you could make new. So we're really trying to also connect this place to the people that used to work there, and also by having this certain type of company on there, like a social enterprise. Yeah.
I want to go.
Yeah. Please come by.
It sounds
Like we
it sounds great. There's a really nice statistic in the Circular Charlotte report. If all plastics landfilled in Charlotte were recycled instead, this would save 329 barrels of oil per year, while creating jobs and revenue. So I'd just like to kind of maybe end this conversation with maybe your impressions on what are the key opportunity areas, or areas of like your recommendations, where cities can start and where they can make the biggest difference?
Yeah. So there, of course, are huge opportunities in planning and design when we talk about the transition to the circular economy, like the way we design our cities. And I think in that, like if you talk about opportunities, it's important to look at the different scales, right? So you can look citywide, you can look at an area level, but you could also look at the building level. So if we look at a citywide level, the construction sector, I think, is a very important opportunity. There are huge gains to be made by creating more synergy in this sector. So for example, you could implement an urban mining strategy where you link the materials that come free when buildings are demolished to new constructions. So that really promotes the use of secondary materials. You could also think about using a building hub. So this is a place to store these materials, which could really reduce the transportation emissions and energy use. I think there was this research that proved, or there was a pilot that proved that could reduce traffic by 66%, or transportation for the building sector by 66%. So that's quite a lot. And then if you look at the neighborhood level, area development, for example, both transformation and new areas, there are many opportunities by integrating circular principles from the start. And here it's key that cities are really starting off with high ambitions. So think about reusing water, or even implementing decentralized water systems, or being energy productive. One thing we did in Amsterdam, for example, is come up with new guidelines for their tendering processes. So what does a tender look when it's circular? So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at that. And then finally, on the building level, there's also much to gain with planning for the end of life at the beginning of the building process. So one way to do that is by integrating a material passport. So a material passport really gives insight on the different materials that are in a new building. So when the building is demolished, these materials are already identified, so you can really easily repurpose them when they free up. And that, of course, also needs to go hand in hand with like flexible and modular construction, so things come apart easily and aren't destroyed in the process. So I think like those three are really some good opportunities within cities.
Great. Well, Tamara, thank you so much for your time. And I really encourage our audience listening today to have a look at the Metabolic website.
Yeah.
It's full of freely available reports and resources, and there's so much that can be learnt. So thanks a lot, Tamara, for your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to pass you over to our second speaker today, Phil Guthrie from Circular London. So
is that working? Hello. Great. Yeah. So yeah, as Lucy mentioned, I'm from Circular London, which is a program of London Waste and Recycling Board. And we're a kind of a partnership of the GLA and London councils, which was set up 10 years ago to look at primarily waste and recycling across London. But as we looked at that, we soon realized that the real savings and issues and stuff like that was actually upstream. So that's when we started to look at the circular economy. So we started to transition and look at that, and that's where the Circular London program came in to look at that, those areas. Today I'm going to talk about 4 main cross-cutting themes which we find in our work, which is around policy, collaboration and communication, innovation and demonstration, and discuss some of the work that we have been doing there. Yeah, great. So just as a little recap, circular economy, just because I didn't know if everybody else would know what we mean by a circular economy, but it's about trying to keep products and materials circulating at their highest possible value. So it includes recycling, but it's also about reuse and remanufacturing. So in the little diagrams on the side, you can see the linear economy is very much dig it out, use it, throw it away. Recycling economy, you might get a few more uses out of it, but essentially you're degrading the quality of the product, and then you have to throw it away. And then a circular economy keeps those materials in circulation for as long as possible. So we set out, like, why would you do this? So we did a bit of work which looked at what the value and the waste reduction potential is for London. And so a study showed that there is 7 billion annually per year from 2036 if we did a good uptake of circular economy just for London. Now, some of that requires areas around London, particularly when you're talking about issues around food, to transition at the same time. But I think that is likely. A large chunk of that potential is in the built environment, as there are considerable waste streams. I think it's something like 60% of London's waste is actually in construction and demolition waste. We also, that slide hasn't come out quite so well, but we also looked at the waste reduction potential on different uptake scenarios. So the top line is the kind of business as usual, population increases, therefore waste potential increases in London, and different uptakes will drastically drop that. So the bottom line would show something like a 60% reduction in waste production over by 2050 if we transition to a circular economy. So there's great incentives, because also reduction in waste frees up land in London, and also is reducing costs to deal with that waste. So there's multiple reasons, and so some of the themes and some of the activity that we've looked at in London is around policy. So 2 years ago, we wrote a route map for London, which is what those economic assessments were based upon. And these looked at 5 different sectors: built environment, food, textiles, electricals, and plastics. And it's really it's very practical actions that can happen in London, some of which we're committing to, some of which we're asking industry to commit to. And to pick up a little bit on what Tamara was talking about previously, we use this as a tool to engage business, to engage other local governments, and to engage academia and other groups like that, to really develop something which was a collaborative exercise. And these actions it's not a fixed in stone route map. It's supposed to be an organic document that we sort of challenge industry to kind of commit to some stuff, or where there is progress being made about what's next, or if there are things that are missing, to adapt and change that document. And we felt at the time that also there were some distinct enabling sectors, like sort of the digital technical sector, finance, higher education, government, and media, to really unlock some of that potential for the circular economy and the uptake, right from business through to consumer. So that really led us to, I guess, use that as a piece of policy to then influence London's strategies, of which I'm going to talk primarily about the London Plan, but the London Environment Strategy and the Responsible Procurement Policy for the GLA, the Greater London Authority, which is the group of government authorities, including the fire service and the police and the ambulance. So we influence those strategies, and they've all had circular economy written into those strategies. The bigger one, or the significant one that has come out came out end of last year, but is the London Plan, and this is the spatial plan for London. So it determines development, approval process, and the sort of real areas of focus for London in terms of construction, for different opportunity areas within London, so where there are focused development areas. And one of the policies that was put into that was every significant project, so of homes of, I think it's 100 or more, and they're called referable projects, they have to go to the mayor for approval, and they require a circular economy statement as part of that process. I should just mention the London Plan is in draft form, so it's out to consultation at the moment. So we're hoping to hear back later in the year exactly what has been approved and finally published. But part of the work that we've been doing is working on the guidance around the circular economy statement, which really looks at it provides a decision tree effectively to early stage developments around what they around things they should consider. So, like, is there a building already on your site? If there is, can you reuse part of it? Or if your building is going to be there for a very long time, it has a long a longevity effectively, then design for that. But some of the components inside it might be designed on a short-term basis. So it really just looks at kind of breaking that down and asking the questions right at the inception of the project, so that things like pre-demolition audits and stuff like that can happen in order to, I guess, make the most of the materials that are there existing, but also the materials that you're putting in. So I think that's going to be quite a significant piece of policy, which should, I guess, start right from the sort of client end, right from the top down, to really encourage the circular economy to start moving, as it were. Other areas another cross-cutting theme we had is around collaboration. And one project that we did, which actually ties quite nicely into the circular economy statement, is a bit of research we did, a Climate Kick funded project, which looks at the business models for reusable buildings. And by reusable buildings, I mean the broadest definition you could possibly think of. So I will go through each one of those. We looked at 5. And really looking from a client perspective, what is the economic and the business case for actually doing it? Where does it stack up and where does it pay back? So, for example, flexible buildings designed for that sort of adaptation in use, and making them really like designed to be flexible. And we did some test examples, just desk study applications, but with social housing clients, for all of these business models, because they were really interested in it. And they've tested one a couple of years ago in Lewisham, which is designed, it's using a meanwhile space. It's designed to then take down the building and put that somewhere else when that site is ready to be redeveloped. So we took them through these business models and really asked them what they thought of them and where they thought there was potential. So flexible, adaptable, which is like perhaps a slightly long-term extension or change in the building. Recoverable, which is where you might design for disassembly and reuse of the components of the building. Relocatable, so literally moving a house from one site to the next, like I mentioned in Lewisham, or actually returnable. So do you lease a building? So there is someone who owns a fleet of buildings, and then they could lease them out to a council or a government to help with a short-term housing need. So that was of particular interest of the social housing sort of local governments who might have some meanwhile space that they're looking to redevelop, but not right now. And so can they lease some buildings, some houses to put on that to service a short-term need, and then but not have to own the asset outright and then be able to pass that asset back. So those are the models we looked at, and as I say, we tested it with some clients. It was just a sort of high-level scoping on terms of the business case, but what it did show was that there is great potential for this, and there was great. We had a good group of social housing providers who are willing and wanting to look at this in more detail going forward. Another area of collaboration that we've been doing is last year we had the world's first circular economy week in London, where we just gathered everybody together to really showcase what we're trying to do in London, and get people talking and collaborating, with the aim for them to maybe start doing some demonstration projects with, so we had small SMEs, we had government, we had bigger corporates, all in one room for the launch event, and just really try to facilitate those conversations. But then for the rest of the week, we also invited other people to be running events throughout the week, and we're doing it again this year, 10th to the 14th of June, and we've already seen more events than we had last year, more and better and bigger. So it's really exciting. So if you want more details about that, do let me know, and I'm sure we can feedback what the outcomes and results are. The other thing we've looked at is innovation. So just recently we have launched our Circular Economy Accelerator, which really takes early stage startups and supports them along their journey to really grow, I guess, and provide their business model to the market. And so that actually sits in our new office. So they're alongside us. We support them. It's a 6-month program. At the moment, it's on built environment is the topic at the moment, and these 7 businesses are the ones that are part of that accelerator. And we will look to be doing another accelerator in 6 to 8 months' time, and possibly looking at a slightly different topic. We also have a business support program, which I don't have a slide for, but which has slightly maturer businesses on it that we provide purely business support on how they might develop either their circular idea, the circular product they've already got, and how they might grow, or if they're a linear business, how they might become circular. So that's how we kind of help a slightly maturer business, and we've got a portfolio of 120 businesses on that, and it's growing all the time. So that's really exciting to see lots of exciting innovations in London itself. And one of the kind of ultimate aims that we try and push for in London is to try and get practical demonstration of circular economy, and practical demonstration in a way that can be replicated and repeated. So much so that when we were having a new office, partly so that we could house that accelerator, we decided we'd put our money where our mouth is and try and do it along circular economy lines and principles. So that meant putting out a tender and specification procurement based on circular economy, asking for those different business models about reuse, recycled content, recyclability, and remanufactured. So we managed to provide office fit out for a low cost office fit out, but actually got quite a high quality finish as part of it. And we have things like reclaimed wooden flooring. We have all the furniture is remanufactured, so is on its second life. All the IT is remanufactured. Our kitchen, when we took over one of the big wins, I guess, is when we looked at leasing the office. We did an audit to begin with and said, well, what's here? What can we reuse? And so that included all the existing carpets. We tried to reuse as much of that as possible, which saved on flooring costs. We reused all the air conditioning, all the lighting, and even the kitchen. So we were taking out the kitchen to provide more shower facilities for all the cyclists who work for us. and we got the landlord to take that out as carefully as possible so that we could reuse that kitchen, and we did. We didn't need any more kitchen cabinets, and we just moved it and reused all the components, as well as showcasing some of our innovative products. So we've got, or in fact, we're sitting on one of the tables, which is made from recycled yogurt pots. So the tabletop is a solid plastic tabletop, which looks beautiful, but it's made from recycled, melted down yogurt pots, and loads of other products like that. So it's really exciting, and it uses all sorts of fun, exciting things. It was a challenge. There are lots of lessons learned about allowing enough design time and changing procurement slightly, but it's really exciting to try and walk the talk, and show that. And it's certainly been a great thing that we love to show off to people and give them tours of all the different things. Just going to give two quick examples. So these weren't done by us, but we were kind of, I guess, involved in some way. We know about the stories. So there is a charity in London which called Respace, which used meanwhile space. So there was an office that was that was kind of sitting empty. So they approached the landlord. They took over the office for a fixed 3-year sort of term, and they made a community space out of it, which was amazing. And they've got some amazing statistics about starting with £250, but by the end of the project, they were giving thousands of pounds worth of free furniture and stuff like that away to people. And it was a real benefit to Dalston in the local community. So that's what you can do if you kind of think slightly outside the box with some of those spaces in a city. And then there's also the kind of, on the other side, there's using new business models. So Philips and the Students' Union group, Students' Union group was refitting their office, and they asked Philips to basically provide light, not light fixtures. So they entered a service contract, so a leasing model, where they were provided with light rather than the actual fixtures, and so Philips then maintained that for them, and so they never bought the fixtures, they just paid for a sort of monthly subscription effectively. So that gives you a sort of a range of things. That's all I was going to talk about. I'm really open to questions.
Thanks so much, Phil. That was an amazing presentation. So many practical examples. Hopefully we'll have some good questions at the end, and we can perhaps go over some more of the detail. I just wanted to quickly cover a few more case studies, a couple with a stronger heritage focus. And just for info, we heard from Tamara about the Kuvel project in Amsterdam, and I've just got the hyperlink there, so you can learn more about that really inspiring project, which was very much focused on industrial heritage and reframing that whole area to talk about sustainability and innovation and forward future thinking in a similar way to the project in Eindhoven, that again, drawing from the Philips example, this was a former Philips factory that's been transformed and regenerated into a creative quarter for Eindhoven, and it houses all kinds of creative SMEs and startups, but also demonstrates a whole range of smart and sustainable technologies. For example, sensors and apps which are looking to monitor and reduce energy consumption, to sensors that look at pollution, which obviously also informs health and well-being strategies, and the data is also published online, and an open source data platform. So you can learn more about that project with the hyperlink on the slide. We also have this really great case study from Vienna, which is a hub of materials recycling and redistribution. There's also a lovely example similar called Materials for the Arts in New York, and that also has a really informative website. And both of these projects not only are looking to rehome and redistribute materials, but also have a really strong focus on social engagement, education through different work programs and workshops. Something that the Tandler project does is combining social and economic benefits. All revenues are donated to charitable purposes, and citizens have access to these high quality secondhand goods, which are deliberately set at affordable prices. And they also have organised events to catch the attention of younger groups. So using things like dance festivals and after work shopping opportunities, different events that aim to reach wider audiences and talk to people about circular economy, but in more engaging and culturally relevant terms. I wanted, again, obviously you've heard from Phil talking about Circular London, but I think this is a great example of an investment within the city, really focused on sharing and enabling good practice to flourish, investing in businesses and supporting them in realising circular economy opportunities. And finally, political and legal structures. And I wanted to share from the European platform perspective, the partnership on circular economy, which you can download. There's also the circular economy European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, which is a joint initiative by the European Commission and the European Economic and Social Committee. And you'll find on these two websites lots of really useful information and resources, as well as different practical examples and case studies which you can learn from. And then finally, some key considerations that will perhaps allow you to get started. And apologies, this isn't the most aesthetically pleasing slide, but I'll just move through them. I've included a few hyperlinks to examples that you can follow up with. But first of all, ensuring that these principles of circularity and sustainability are embedded within any cultural and creative industries policy and strategy. And we have a number of examples of cultural strategies which are really starting to include sustainability and circular economy as policy areas, not only to contribute to a city's environmental ambitions, but also to realise greater efficiencies for the cultural sector, encouraging its resilience going forward, which has particular relevance to things like adaptive reuse of heritage buildings, smarter use of heritage buildings and heritage stock, as well as reducing costs and being more financially efficient in terms of energy consumption, as an example, or procurement decision making. The second point there is ensuring then that policy and strategy are accompanied by investment and support structures, which then sort of lead on to some of those, the third and fourth points. But it's great to see sustainability included within cultural policy and strategy. But of course, in order to implement this, you need to ensure that there are investment frameworks, that there are exchange platforms, that there are communities of practice that are being created to support cultural heritage and creative industries, managers and workers in understanding what the opportunities are, and ensuring they have the skills to make use of them. Which leads us on to this third point around a kind of a task force or some kind of organisation set up within a city that can mediate between these different stakeholders of business, policymakers and civil society. That can be a kind of a repository for information and resources and really help accelerate your circular economy agenda within your city. And obviously Circular London are a real leadership example. Our fourth point here, establishing a system for data collection and performance monitoring. Tamara really excellently articulated this before, and Metabolic certainly have accumulated a selection of KPIs for cities to inspire a framework of impact management and evaluation. But I've included there a couple of links for further reading that might help you create your own indicators framework. But like anything within the world of sustainability, that initial data collection and understanding is an essential component in knowing where your leverage points are in terms of driving change, and understanding which interventions are successful, which need to be adapted or perhaps even reconsidered altogether. And this also leads on to our fifth point around advocacy opportunities. So again, understanding where your successes are lying gives you great material to then communicate and celebrate the successes, and particularly consider those unique advocacy opportunities that are available from working with cultural heritage and the creative industries, which embody amazing opportunities as platforms for civic engagement and participation and awareness raising, and can help translate circular economy principles in all kinds of myriad creative and exciting ways. So do also think about that. So I think you've heard enough from speakers today, and we really want to give you the opportunity to put forward some questions. So just to remind you, unfortunately, Tamara has had to leave us today, but you still have myself and, more importantly, Phil from Circular London. So if there are any areas that you'd like us to drill down on or provide some more insights, please use the questions box. And I'm actually happy maybe to kick us off while perhaps you start thinking of your questions. So my question is around what are your thoughts on how important it is to connect the circular economy agenda to, for example, the Paris Agreement and kind of climate change policy and targets. I see a lot of examples of people using the circular economy in order to improve efficiency, to create new value. There's a lot of talk of green growth. But I think it's really important that any adoption of circular economy policy and strategy still has to happen in this context of a 1.5 degree world. And I wonder, Phil, I know I've just put you very much on the spot, if you had any reflections on that yourself.
Thanks. No, great question. Definitely, I think is probably the answer. I think it does. It needs to talk to that, and I think anecdotally we know that the circular economy definitely has a CO2 benefit, because if you reuse a product, okay, yes, you might do some reprocessing to it, but the idea is that you change it as little as possible. That is going to have massive advantages, both in operational CO2, but also in the embedded carbon of those products, and the fact that you're diverting either stuff from landfill, and you're also not using more new resources. So that has cascade effects right across a supply chain. I think it's something that's not been well quantified at the moment, and that connection hasn't been made explicitly, partly because it's quite hard. It's not an easy thing to trace, but I think it's really important, and I think those two things need to sit hand in hand. Yeah, because I think it's a really valuable metric, and it's something we have been working with the GLA to consider, and the C40s group as well, who they're well connected with. So hopefully that will come through more and more in discussions and stuff.
Great. So we have a question here from Paula. Do you have any specific examples on food public procurement and or food waste, which is an excellent question. Phil, is there anything you'd
yeah, I mean, food waste is a huge issue, particularly in London, but you don't want food to be going to landfill. It's complete waste, and it actually causes a lot of problems. So yeah, it's a massive area of interest for us. We have a campaign paid for by another European project called ECAP, I think, or is it Life? I can't remember. Anyway, which looks at small changes that you can make that will make big differences. So that might just be is working with a couple of boroughs in London to look at trying to get consumers to, I don't know, do simple things like not peel potatoes and then throw away the peelings. Like, can you just eat the whole of the potato without peeling it? Or other kind of interventions around those. So they're just little tips and tools, and cookery workshops as well. So we've had some chefs come in and do cookery workshops. So that's one big area that that we're interested in. But we also work with all of the London boroughs to try and harmonise the recycling, certainly, so the food waste end of things, harmonise the recycling services, and encourage all the boroughs to recycle food waste. That is quite a difficult process due to the large procurements that are involved, but it is something that we've been working with them on for a number of years now. And then we've also, with our Advanced London SME support program, we have a number of food waste SMEs involved in that. Platforms such as Olio, which is a sort of a neighbor to neighbor kind of share your food. I've got some food waste. Does anyone want it? Kind of thing. And then also on the more technical end, an SME like Winnow, which has some technology which works with restaurants to really reduce the food, to make their menus more efficient and their procurement of food more efficient, so they're not buying food that they then have to throw away. So there's lots of stuff. There are many more, but yeah, it's an area we really care about, and we'd love to see less food going to landfill, definitely.
Thanks, Phil. I think it's interesting from a lot of work that we've had with various cultural organisations across the city, how now the infrastructure seems to be changing and more organisations are able to include food waste and sort of composting bins within their premises. And so a great example of where infrastructure might meet education and awareness raising, because again, you need people to understand what kind of materials are compostable, particularly if you're working with festivals that might be using biodegradable serveware, papers and cups. If this goes into the wrong bin, like a plastics bin, it can sort of pollute that waste stream. So sometimes with the world of waste and materials management, that clarity of communication is often I think, one of the most important things, and can be a real barrier in terms of your recycling percentages. It's something that I think we encounter quite a lot, a real diversity in approaches of just labeling people's recycling bins. And I think that can really make a big difference. So we also have a really a very interesting question here about the Sustainable Development Goals, a very ambitious question to try and answer, but very interesting, from Stefan here, which is about contextualizing, local contextualizing of the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are global goals covering themes like circular economy and consumption, as well as climate action, justice, biodiversity, water. They're a United Nations framework that kind of brings all these different concepts together, and are really useful. I highly recommend reading more about them if you're not already familiar. But the question here is about how does one scale that to the sort of regional or municipal level? And are there approaches or recommendations on how to do that? I don't know, Phil, if you have any thoughts on this. From our perspective, I think it is a really important question that more, I think more cities are doing. London has a set of sustainable development indicators, which it is, I think, sort of looking at how it aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals, because there's a lot of crossover and similarity, but they're not following the exact same methodology. And I think there's probably a lot to say about the role of consultation in trying to contextualize the SDGs. So looking at the SDGs, you know, things will be more apparent in some places than they are in others. And I think you can only really draw upon the detail of that through working with a whole selection of city stakeholders, and very much focused on civic groups, and perhaps also marginalized communities and people who don't always get the platform or the space to be part of these conversations. I don't know if Phil, you have any examples?
Not explicitly, but I would say, I mean, great question. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's really important to link and work out, I guess, map those SDGs into a local context. I do know of one business who have taken those SDGs and really written them into their sustainability sort of strategy. But the really interesting thing was how it maps with circular economy, and talking to their circular economy lead, they were, and I definitely agree with this, that quite a lot of people try and put circular economy just into one SDG, and actually I think it sits across many, if not all. And so that's really interesting to think about circular economy, not just as a technical solution, but also how it impacts on the more social and cultural aspects of a city and its people, because ultimately that's really important too. But yeah, we haven't done a huge amount. It is something that I think will become more and more paramount in the years to come.
We've also worked with an organisation, the Roundhouse, which is a cultural venue in London, about aligning their business strategy to the Sustainable Development Goals. They were really leading in a number of social sustainability agenda. So for them, it was important that their environmental ambitions were part of this already embedded and kind of holistic interdisciplinary programs. So you didn't have these strategies that were potentially fighting against each other, but that were actually harmonized and mutually enforcing, which is so important when I think engaging with social and environmental issues, that they are mutually enforcing and they're not seen as sort of separate issues. And that is where the Sustainable Development Goals really help contextualize this work, because they are so all-inclusive and encompassing. One point I would just like to make on them is that the Goal 13, climate action, has to underpin the rest of them. And this is within the United Nations narrative. However, sometimes I think that point isn't drawn out enough, and people kind of look at this framework and cherry pick their favorite goals and then decide that their project is in fact sustainable. When of course, if it's not within the context of climate action and 1.5 degree world, as articulated by the Paris Agreement, it really isn't sustainable. So that's just a comment from me about that. So we'll just wait and see if anyone else has any questions that they'd like to throw in. We're delighted to say that we have the exact same number of attendees that we started with. So clearly you've enjoyed the webinar enough to stay to this point. So now if you do have any burning questions, it's the time to share. So we have another question here that's looking at urban and rural linkages, which is very interesting. There is a number of projects similar to this, I believe. And the question is, where do you see, from your experience, the biggest potentials and challenges of promoting urban-rural collaboration, considering material flows and resources? A very interesting question. In a lot of these projects, we see there's so much focus on cities, and perhaps this is to the detriment of people living outside of cities. I don't know if
Yeah, no, very, very good question. Yes, I mean, effectively cities are consumer centers, as you were. So a lot of the production and a lot of the raw materials, particularly with things like food, come from the areas around the city. Like, it's not produced in the city. So I think there are massive linkages, and that needs to be reinforced. And when we talk about particularly in the area of food, just because of the sheer land that's required, but it actually applies to built environment raw materials as well, and a lot of the other sectors we work in. Those materials come into the city, and so it's really important to consider a city and its surroundings, and as you know, the world is a globalized world as well. So there's big systemic issues with a lot of this stuff, in terms of materials coming from all over the globe. But I think there is scope for cities needing to become a little bit more self-contained, if that makes sense. Like, I think those linkages are really important, and it's really important to consider them. But it's also important to consider what needs to come in and what can be produced or reproduced or remanufactured within a city centre, and or those rural areas as well, that they become they don't just become net exporters solely, but they also look to service themselves by the materials that they have locally. So it is trying to do a little bit of what do we have locally, and what do you have in your hands in a city, and or a local neighborhood, that you can use as your local materials, rather than bringing in lots of external materials.
Excellent. I think that's such an important point. I mean, food is such a great platform for engaging people around sustainability and circular economy issues, and being able to discuss the provenance of food and the whole sort of localism agenda, connecting people in cities more clearly to where actually their food is coming from, is both a way of investing in local economies or regional economies, as well as discussing issues around food sustainability. We have a nice question here that I think is going to be very useful to make a good point about Circular London's offering. So Teresa, who works in London and is in the middle of a move from one building to another, reusing many materials. Great. Can we be reinforced by Circular London in terms of recognition so that we can be an example for other companies?
Yes, in a very simple way. We love to share stories of all the good work that's going on in London. We're here to promote not just the stuff that we try and do, but all the other great examples around the city. So I'd love to talk to you about that. I'd love to hear what you're doing. And if we can share any experiences of where we've moved offices and other things that you could consider, we'd love to share that. But also hear what you've done and encourage. We try and encourage lots of case studies, and we have a forum for that on our website. But also we love to kind of share those stories far and wide, and certainly around a sort of circular office principle. We've kind of been partnering and collaborating with Business in the Community, which is a charity which connects lots of businesses together and looks at their social good and sort of internal policies and stuff, and they've got a campaign on the circular office, which we have been working with them. So I'm sure they would also be interested to hear about your particular case study as well. So yeah, get in touch.
Excellent, that's what we like to see. And I'll refer also to Julie's Bicycles' current collaboration with Circular London, courtesy of the Greater London Authority, the GLA. We're currently doing a survey of different cultural organisations across the city in terms of what circular economy case studies and practices we can bring together to share on the Circular London website. And we're looking at those case studies across 5 main themes: ethical fashion, plastics, food, sustainable production, and offices, circular offices. So that will be a resource that is released in the next couple of months. Okay, well, I think that seems like a nice place to start drawing the webinar to a close today. So I would like to thank our 2 speakers who've very kindly joined us today and provided huge insights. We will be sharing the slides and the webinar recording with everyone who registered for the webinar. So we'd be very grateful for you to share it with anyone you think is interested. And we look forward to welcoming you to another webinar in the near future. Thank you very much for joining us.